Alright boys, so I have returned for the next installment in the Gold Servant tier list videos, and in today's video we're going to be doing the Gold Lancer Servants, and I've actually really enjoyed kind of doing a lot of these tier list videos because I've been getting better and better at doing them, been taking more notes, been doing more research on them to try to make sure that I have my placements be as concise and as well-founded as possible. So I'm hoping that as these go on, people kind of understand where I'm putting some of these placements on the list. You know, I know in the past there's been some that has been like, oh, I'm putting this guy here, and I knew why I wanted him to be in that specific spot, but I didn't explain it well enough. So, you know, as these videos go on, I think I'm getting better and better at it, and I hope that's showing in the quality and like the actual argumentation for some of the servants being where they are. So, you know, hopefully you guys are enjoying these tier list videos. If you are, make sure you leave a like on the video, make sure you subscribe. It's going to help your boy out on that road to 100k. You know, we're on that daily FGO content grind. You can also click that join button if you want bonus content, although I'm kind of waiting for one of the challenge quests and one of the events to open up, because as you guys know, I'm going to be putting out challenge quest videos for channel members, and then when we get enough channel members, we'll start doing like polls over there and give them like exclusive servant videos. So click that join button if you're interested in that. Now, don't be looking too much into the actual tier names. As you guys know, that I kind of just slap up like meme tier names, right? But they're going to function as S, A, B, C, and D. They're just, you know, little fun names, you know, you know what I'm saying? We like to have fun over here on the Hub channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start off with Liz. And I'm actually going to be sticking Liz in B tier because of her more recent buffs. Now, Liz, if you guys don't know, double buffs female servants, and there's a lot of female servants in the game. They're kind of like one of the most common things to come out because everybody that plays FGO is an absolute coomer. So, you know, having a servant that can double buff your female servants is very good because that's a 40% attack buff for 3 turns. But not only does she do that, but now she also has an AoE defensive lower, and she removes 1 buff from all of the enemies and seals their skills. So now Liz has become this insane damage support specifically for female servants, and then she also has a way to kind of keep herself around with the guts that she has, and she's providing some utility by sealing enemy skills, and she's actually kind of shaping up to becoming a really solid servant. I think she's about maybe 1 buff off specifically on her guts, because her guts, just all it does is just the guts. I mean, it's good, but it still probably needs something else to make it a bit better. She also has a decent bit of utility as a DPS because she does have pierce defense on her NP, but she's definitely shaping up to be a very solid servant as like just a really good female buffing servant. So next we have Scathach, and I think Scathach is definitely now an S tier servant. She's become absolutely nutty. I mean, she's one of those servants that everybody knows is really good because she just slam dunks the enemy for just insane amounts of damage. But now they gave her a battery, they gave her the ability to guarantee her crit buff and her star rate with that same battery skill and the quick mana burst that she has. And then, you know, now her like NP, it has stun, she has an anti-divine, an anti-undead niche. Like, she's just doing so much. She has a dodge as well for survivability. Like, Scathach just does so much as a DPS servant, and she's like almost exactly what you would want your DPS to look like. You know, she's got the card buff for herself, she has 2 really good niches, a battery, just very good, you know, 50% crit damage for 3 turns. It's a very good amount to have. You know, her NP gives her a little bit of survivability back by giving her the chance to stun the opponent, and even though the overcharge is insta-kill, which is really not all that great, you at least have that chance to stun. So it's almost like if you don't insta-kill the enemy, you stun them instead, and you buy yourself another turn. So Scathach is just one of those servants, like kind of like the single target quick version of Okita. Well, I guess single target quick is what Okita is, but the Lancer version of Okita. But she's just really good. She's like one of those old servants that's always been pretty good, that after her last 2 buffs, she's insanely glue up. Like, the glow up for her is absolutely insane. Now we have Lancer Alter, who, I don't know why I'm laughing. I'm gonna put her in A tier. I think she is really good. I think she's probably looking at maybe 1 more buff. Like, I think I would like to see them buff her instinct skill, which is funny because her instinct skill was already like just already a very good skill to begin with, right? Because when she came out, instinct skills were like 15 stars, and that's all they were. They were really bad. But she came out and her instinct skill was 10 stars, star weight, and crit damage, but it all only lasts for 1 turn. So I think We just need to buff that up a little bit, and then she's good to go, because everything else she does is really solid. Like, she's got a 20% battery. She has a 3-time 55% Buster Mana Burst skill, which means, I mean, the normal Buster Mana Burst is 50% and you only get that for a turn. She's getting a 55% Buster Mana Burst for 3 hits, so you can use it all in one Brave Chain. You can use it on turn 1 with an NP, then the following turn you can get the next 2 hits with your 2 Buster cards. Like, it just allows you to spread out the damage a little bit more, and it gives you opportunities for more, you know, just different, like, spreading out the damage and whatnot. It's very, very good. I mean, on its own, even if it was just 55% for one turn, it's already insane. But the fact that it allows you to maybe spread out the damage a little more instead of just wasting it if you just only had your NP on that one turn, you can spread it out. That's very good. Her NP pierces defense, like, that's also really, really solid. And keep in mind, she has an AoE NP that has a chance to seal all enemies NP. So she's already got a very, very solid foundation. I would like to see that instinct skill get buffed and have that bad, her charisma is really atrocious, right? She suffers from the Saber Altar, like, E charisma, where it's like 12%. It's just basically non-existent. I mean, it's there, you know, but it's not as good as it could be. So maybe buff the charisma, then buff the instinct, and then I think we have a definitive S tier servant on our hands. But then we have Karna. Karna's actually better than people give him credit for. He's not exactly an S tier servant, but he's definitely like an A tier solid choice to go with. I mean, he has the ability to seal an enemy's NP for 1 turn, which is very solid. It gives him some survivability. He has a 25% battery, that also comes with 3 turns of 50% crit damage, which is a very solid amount of crit damage, mind you. He has a good anti-divine niche on his NP. Unfortunately and fortunately, he lowers enemy buster resistance on his NP, but it doesn't proc first to give him that little bit of extra damage. I think I really would have liked to see him have that, because it really would have helped him out. But I guess the idea is that you fire the NP, and then it makes the subsequent buster cards hit that much harder. And then, you know, he's also got what I like to call, like, the Karna and Arjuna Mana Burst skill, where it's a 30% buster buff and then a 20% NP damage buff, and it actually gives them more damage than if they just had a 50% buster mana burst, because the different buff types multiply into each other. So it's actually a really strong mana burst. So I think if they maybe buff up Karma a little bit, like maybe buff his first skill, because that's probably his weakest skill. I think we'd all agree on that. Like, his third skill, I think, is fine. Like a 25% battery with the crit damage, with the star gen, I think that's acceptable. I think the mana burst is fine. It does its job. You know, you could probably add another effect to that if they want. Like, maybe give him some star weight. Maybe let him drop just 30 stars immediately. Something along those lines. But let's definitely buff up that first skill. Maybe just have him have the ability to remove enemy buffs as well. I think that'd actually be really sick. But, or actually, not just kind of off the top of the head, I think something else that would be really cool is play into the fact that, like, Karna has that armor, right? That is, like, makes him impervious to all damage. Like, he doesn't have an invincibility or anything like that. So maybe have him get, like, a really high, like, damage reduction skill, or an invincibility that stays on him, or it's a chance to neg attacks as long as he doesn't fire his NP. Because that could be, like, a very cool lore skill where it's like, as long as you don't fire the NP, he's really tanky, but then when you fire the NP, you gotta wait for the skill to come back. I think something along those lines could be very good and help him out in challenge quests. But then we have Fionn. Fionn's going to be another A-tier servant, because if you have not used Fionn, you might be like, oh, Fionn, bad, meme character. Like, why is he up here in A-tier? But Fionn is, like, a super good arts looping lancer at this point. Now, that's pretty much his main, like, claim to fame right now. I mean, he does have some good skills. Like, his first skill buffs the entire party star gen and NP gain rate, which I'm not going to complain about. Like, I love getting those types of buffs. I was gassing up Nicholas Tesla because he has the party-wide NP gain buff, and this is that NP gain buff for the party, but it also gives him star gen, which is good because he's an art servant, and they don't have a very high inherent star gen stat. In fact, their arts cards can't gen stars at all, so buffing up that stat is actually really good. Then he also has a taunt, which is pretty useful for challenging content. If you want to bring him there, it allows you to control where the opponents are going to attack you. He has an odd dodge skill, but more importantly, he has a 30% battery, which again helps him out a lot in farming. I think it's a little unfortunate that he has the 40% arts mana burst that only lasts for a turn, because if you're going to go lower than 50%, usually they try to extend it to maybe like 3 turns or 3 attacks or something along those lines to make it a little bit worth it, because it's not exactly 50%, but, you know, it's still better than if you didn't have any arts buff at all. Like, I'm sure they'll buff it in the future and kind of fix it up a little bit. And then he has the odd thing where he lowers his charm like resistance against female enemies, but then his NP gives him mental debuff immunity. So, you know, just fire the NP and you don't have to worry about being charmed, I guess. But mainly, you're going to be using him as an arts looping lancer, and he does a very, very good job at that. I remember when I was first starting out on JP, around when the Benny Enma event was going on, and I pulled Fionn, I was like, ah, this is really unfortunate. Then I started taking him out for a spin, and I was like, this boy's kind of looping. Like, this boy Fionn's kind of good, man. Like, he's actually better than I thought. So, slapping him up in A tier. Brynhildr's a very odd one for me to place. I feel like you either put at the very high end of B tier or the very low end of A tier. And I'm coming from the angle where I've used Brynhildr a lot. I have both Bryn and Scathach on my NA account, and I always find myself reaching for Scathach as opposed to Brynhildr just because I think, I don't know, that she's just a little lackluster. She has the Karna mana burst, but it's a little bit weaker, where it's like the Buster buff and the NP damage buff. Still really strong, but a little bit weaker than what we see in Karna. She has a 30% battery, which is a buff she'll be getting in the future, which, I mean, does help her out. Like, that's objectively very good, but, you know, again, I just don't find that it ends up helping her out all that much. Like, I just feel like it wasn't enough, ironically enough. And batteries are usually what fix older servants, but it just wasn't something that really, you know, gave her that oomph that she really needed. She has this niche as well where she can like massively lower the enemy's NP damage and their crit star, or not their crit star, but their critical attack chance. But again, like, unless you're pairing that with other servants like, say, Nightingale, you're still going to get bopped by the NP, and she has no hardline survivability, so, you know, she's just going to get bopped anyway. Her third skill is really good because it gives one of your allies big boy star weight and a 40% crit damage buff for 3 turns. That's definitely very good. And her special niche on her NP, being the Brynhildr's Beloved buff, is also very good, but she is just lacking something. And it's hard for me to place my finger on what I would say she's lacking. Like, what do I think that she needs? And I really can't place my finger on it. I would think maybe if we just buff the first skill and we just make that a 3-turn buff on both of those, that would massively help her out a lot. But even then, I don't know if that's going to do it for her. So I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you guys think about Brynhildr? Like, what does she need to kind of just give her that little bit of extra oomph? Because she's supposed to be a rival for Scathach, but it seems like Scathach just left her in the dust, right? So I really don't know what she needs to kind of make her good. So I'd love to see suggestions in the comments down below. Then we have Lee. Lee's a little bit hard for me to place. I think, as you'll see, there's a kind of a trend here. I think a lot of the Lancers in this game are really, really good. Like, you probably won't see very many of them in the bottom tier, because I think a lot of the Lancers are built really strong, right? They're already just like average, or they're exceptionally good. And Lee is not an exception to that. Like, I think Lee is absolutely crazy. People sleep on him all the time. He has the ability to kind of bypass everything with Pierce Evasion, Pierce Invincibility, and then Pierce Defense on his NP. So there's like no running, no hiding. You're going to get pokeyed by Lee. And I think that makes him invaluable for a lot of boss fights. He has the burst ability, which I'm not the biggest fan of burst servants. I've kind of talked about this in the last tier list video, that I'd rather have a servant that's consistently good for 3 turns, and then, you know, they kind of have to wait like 2 turns in between each 3-turn pop, as opposed to a servant that's good for 1 turn, and then I gotta wait 4 more turns for that 1 turn to come back. Like, I'd rather just have the 3 consistent good turns and then have to wait 2 turns than, you know, having to wait 4 turns for the 1 turn of damage, you know what I'm saying? But I think Lee does a pretty decent job, and it'd be like disingenuous of me to not acknowledge how good this guy is. Because again, he also has the Arts Mana Burst. He's also got the 100% crit damage. Like, when Lee is going to burst, he's going to pop whoever's in his way. He's going to obliterate them. So definitely a very, very solid servant. If you have Lee, consider leveling him up. He's actually just exceptional. Then we have Ooga Booga Lancer Artoria. She's going in S tier. Like, especially with the advent of Koyenskaya, this girl just got even better after that. I mean, like, we all know basically what she does. She's got the Buster Mana Burst, the 50% battery, cleanses her debuffs, a solid charisma, NP has built-in Pierce Invincibility, just a solid overall servant. But then, I don't know why DW is like, she's not doing enough damage. Let's give her 2 separate special damage mods, one against chaotic enemies and the other against evil. So God forbid you're fighting a chaotic evil enemy. I mean, you could just use her as her boss killer at that point. At that point, just bring her as your boss killer and she'll get the work done. So crazy for farming. With the special damage mod, she's actually really good in challenge quests. The only flaw is that she really doesn't have any way to keep herself alive. Like, she has no form of hard survivability. But again, she's a product of the time of Merlin, and a lot of Buster servants at the time, you'll see, didn't really lean too much into survivability because they're very reliant on Merlin keeping them alive, because admittedly, Merlin does a very good job at doing that. So, you know, she's just very good, right? I think it's very inarguable that she should be like an S tier Lancer. She's very, very good. Then we have Tamamo Lancer. Now, this one might trigger some people, but I'm putting her in B tier. And again, after some extensive use, I actually do feel pretty comfortable putting here. Like, I think she has some good meme potential. I mean, her charisma is very solid. For an old servant, having the 20% charisma, you know, you don't really see that a lot. A lot of the older servants have just really whack charismas. Like, it'll be like 18.5% or like a 13% charisma. She's very lucky to have gotten that. She gives the additional buff to males that if, you know, they're a male servant, they get some crit star generation, which is fine. Not the most game breaking, but it is a fine, nice little addition, especially because she's a Buster servant. And you think you're putting her with Buster servants as well. She has the second skill, which seems like it's bad because you charm an enemy, lower their defense, and then you give them a tick of NP, but it's actually really good. If you're a big brain, you can use this to control when the enemy's going to NP, or you can just use it when they already have a full bar, and then you literally get to use it for no demerit at all, right? Because, you know, they don't go into overcharge mode. Crossing our fingers that they don't implement that enemies can go into overcharge, but, you know, I think that's a very, like, tactful skill that you can use with her. Her third skill is pretty interesting, right? Because it gives her the invincibility, the crit damage, you know, the NP generation. Like, it gives her just a whole host of abilities. And then the demerit is that she stuns herself next turn. And then she has the anti-male niche on her NP. It's just, I find myself a little underwhelmed with her most of the time. And, you know, maybe what I should probably do is actually bump the both of them down into B tier. Maybe that'd actually be a little bit better, because the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, I'm just like not super impressed with these two as single target Buster Lancers. Like, I kind of look at them and I'm like, they're fine. They can get the job done. They have some decent niches that'll make them look good, but they're really nothing exceptional. Whereas, like, when I look at the servants up here, I see a clear, defined goal and path with a lot of them. And actually, what I should probably do is also bump Karna down here as well before I trigger somebody, because I actually think Karna's in the same boat as them, right? I think, like, these are very, like, beginner-friendly, solid, easy servants to use, and they're not doing anything super exceptional. Give them a buff or two, and they'll absolutely pop off. Alright, so now we have our first, like, actual doo-doo butt cheeks. Like, this isn't our actual, like, first doo-doo butt cheeks lander. Yugioh Lancer is just not very good at all. Like, I don't know what they were thinking with this girl. Like, her first skill is just absolutely dead. She's just, like, lowering critical attack chance, and you're like, whoop-de-doo, bro. Like, her NP, I don't know, like, I don't know, bro. It seals skills and has, like, a burn niche. She has, like, a 30% Buster buff for 3 turns, which, that's a little ahead of its time, but it doesn't really do enough for her. And then she reduces an enemy's NP by 30%, and that's really all you're getting. I mean, you're better off using some of the lower rarity servants than using Kiyohime, unless you just think Kiyohime's, like, a cutesy character or something, and that's why you want to use her, then pop off, I guess. But other than that, like, I don't know, dude. She's just not very good. She's probably the worst Lancer that's going to be on this list, dude. Yes, even more worse than people like Bradamante and like Nezha when we get to them. And we'll get to them in a little bit. You believe you me. Then we have Vlad. Vlad, I actually think, is someone who's also a little bit slept on, because Vlad was actually the first 4-star servant I pulled on my NA account when I started playing. I started playing during the Halloween event, and I got Vlad to, like, NP4 because I was really trying to get Cleopatra, and I just got completely shafted on that banner. So Vlad was pretty much a hard carry at the beginning of the game, and I think he's just a generally really solid, strong servant. Like, he's just got, like, a good attack buff, a good defensive buff. He gives everybody an NP damage buff with his tactic skill. Small star refund where he's getting 10 stars every turn for 3 turns. The taunt gives him a little bit of tactability. Like, he's just a very solid, easy to use servant. His NP is actually rather good. I'm not going to let anybody fault him for that. because this NP has built-in Pierce invincibility, and it has an anti-evil niche, which again, for like newer players, that's just very generally applicable. That means you could bring him to any fight. Doesn't really matter what the enemy is doing, if they have dodge, invincibility. He doesn't really care about any of that. He'll bypass it, and you fight a lot of evil enemies, whether they be evil servants or just actual evil mobs. You know, it's just a very, very good servant to bring for a lot of fights. He's just generally very, very good. Now, on the other hand, this is the Buster single target Lancer that I think you want to strive to try to get, because this is what I think, I don't know, like Brynhildr and Tamamo got to get on this guy's level. This is probably why I don't see them as being super insane, because Bingu over here is just a nut servant overall. So he's got like the weird like quick arts deck going on, but he kind of fixes that with his first skill, where he's getting the guaranteed Buster mana burst to make sure that his NP is always slam dunking people. And then he's either going to be getting a quick mana burst or an arts mana burst. He doesn't really care, because if he gets the quick mana burst, it's going to make his quick cards, you know, just hit really hard, and it's going to give him that extra NP gain so they can actually gen some stars and some NP back. Or if he gets the arts mana burst, well, he's just going to refund his NP with an arts crit. So it makes him very versatile for that. It makes it to where it's like you really don't care what he's going to do, because he's very adaptable, which, I mean, it kind of fits into Enkidu's lore. He has the ability to yeet a dodge off of an opponent and then also give himself a dodge, so he has very good survivability on top of a 10k heal. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, he has a 10k heal. I think it's still the fattest heal in the game, and it also cleanses his debuff. So he's supremely good as a solo servant for this reason, that if you just want to throw Enkidu out there, he has a way to dip around NPs with his dodge, and then he has a way to just massively gas up all of the HP that he might have lost in that solo quest. And then, God forbid, you get to his NP, which is just a big stick. You just take the big stick and just bonk somebody on the head with it, because he's lowering their defense before he even hits him with it. So he's getting an extra just big fat 30% defensive demerit on them to smack them with it. If they're divine, forget about it, because they're pretty much getting stunned. And then if they're a threat against humanity, which coincidentally is like all of the hardest bosses in the game, it's like all the trees, all the beasts, all the big mean enemies, Enkidu does well against. So he's like a servant that scales with harder content. Like the harder it gets, the better Bingu gets, right? Like it's absolutely crazy. Like, yeah, he definitely deserves to be an S tier. I've come around on Enkidu. I think he's exceptionally good. I think he's really, really good. On the other hand, we have Madunki Lily, bro, who's just kind of missing out on a lot of buffs. I mean, she has kind of like a quick demerit thing going for her, where she lowers enemy quick resistance on her NP and on a skill. She has like a charm thing kind of going, and then she has like this double survivability buff with her guts and her invincibility, which makes her pretty hard to kill. But I don't know, like she's just lacking some cohesion. Like she definitely needs, I would say, a buff or two to really bring her back. Like when I look at B tier servants, I'm like, you could probably just give them a singular buff and they could definitely become super high tier in like the A tier or S tier. They really just need one more thing to push them over the edge. But you got like these like C tier servants, they need a little bit more work. Like I just don't even know where we would start with Medusa Lily, because she's just kind of got her hands in too many baskets, right? Like, does she want to be this like lockdown, really tanky survivability servant, or does she actually want to be the DPS? Like, they kind of need to funnel her into one of those roles and kind of like get her an identity, right? Because she really doesn't have an identity as a servant. So hopefully they can do that for her and kind of help her out. Because conversely, we got Raikou over here, solid A tier servant. This is like just a really solid support DPS rider. Like this, not a rider, Lancer. This is like a Lancer that you can see just being your DPS or supporting the entire party. It's whatever you want to do with her, because she has a solid charisma. She has a targetable buster buff that's a 40% buster buff that lasts for 3 turns. So basically going to be giving somebody a buster mana burst for 3 turns, and you cleanse their debuffs. And then her NP drops 20 to 40 stars for the other characters to play around with. So like, Raikou is just really, really solid. And then if you want her to pop off with those stars, you could just click her star weight skill. She'll suck them up and start crit popping all over people, right? She'll just start smacking them with the stick. So she's one of those servants that's very versatile. Do you want to use her as a DPS? Do you want to use her as a support? She can fill either role or both, just kind of going with the tide of battle. So Lancer Raikou is a servant I'm very, very like fond of. I think she's super great. Parvati, you guys already know. You guys already know. Like, you should have seen this coming a mile away. Like, Parvati, definite S tier servant. Like, do I really have to go over a Parvati? Like, I think all I gotta say is that, like, skill 1 is a quick plus NP gain skill. Skill 2 is the big stick skill that gives her 50% attack and defense to just bonk somebody over the head. She has a 20% targetable battery that she can use on herself. It does cost 10% of her own NP, so really, if you use it on herself, she only gets 10% NP back, but that's still good enough to help her just barely loop some nodes as well. Like, if she's missing out a little bit of NP, she can give it to herself, or give it to one of her supports to help keep her alive and help her do good. And then her NP charms the entire enemy party and then charges the entire, you know, your party's NP. So Parvati's just nuts. Like, Parvati's just nuts, to say the least. She doesn't really need any buffs going forward. She's going to be good for a long time. Conversely, we have Nezha. Going back to, like, I don't think Nezha's quite, like, this bad, but I'm really teetering on putting her in here because I think she has kind of the same problem. Well, not the same problem as Medusa Lily. Like, I think Medusa Lily lacks an identity. I just think Nezha is suffering from low buffs, right? Because she has a hybrid quick and buster buff, but it's only 20%. And she has a crit buff, but it's only 30%. She has a 20% battery, a guts, like decent star weight. And then they gave her NP a burn gimmick. So it just seems like Nezha really needs some help. Like, honestly, just buff up some of her values. Like, let's... Okay, I know I'm going to say this, but let's just gas up the first skill, like, which I feel like we need to do. Like, let's just gas up that quick and buster to at least 40% each, and that crit damage to 50%. That'll definitely make her far more relevant, and she definitely needs it. I mean, maybe buff up the battery to like 30%, because we just gotta have her be a little more impressive, especially with the advent of append skills. If we can make that battery 30%, it'll actually give her access to having a, you know, false 50% battery, because the 20% append skill, and then she'll have a base 30% battery, but that'll bring her into the spotlight. It'll be very good for her, and she'd be a very good alternative for people that don't have people like Lancer Artoria or Ereshkigal. So I think she really just suffers from having low damage buffs, and if they buff those up a little bit, we could definitely see her kind of make a return to being a more meta servant. But speaking of Ereshkigal, you guys know I was going to put her up in here. I could maybe see NA players seeing her as an A tier servant, but on the JP version of the game, they gave her an insane buff where she gets just like big ooga booga damage against people with the earth attribute, and they made her like buff on her NP just absolutely insane. Like, she makes the entire party resistant to crit damage, to insta kill. She still gives them the attack buff. They just made Ereshkigal absolutely nuts when they buffed her NP. She still does all the other good stuff with, like, the 50% buster mana burst, the 50% battery, the invincibility skill that comes with debuff immunity, and it comes with a buff removal resistance, so you can't even take her stuff. She still has her third skill, which gives her the NP gain for the entire party, the damage cup, the match HP. Like, Ereshkigal is like a really tanky support AoE DPS Lancer. Like, she has so many different roles. In fact, it's kind of gotten to the point where I originally, like, if you were to, like, you know, pin me down on NA and be like, okay, if you got to use Lancer Artoria or Ereshkigal, who are you going to use? I'm like, well, I like Ereshkigal more, but I'd probably use Lancer Artoria. She's a bit more focused into being a DPS, but after Ereshkigal got that NP damage buff, it's like, I mean, Lancer Artoria, who? I don't know who that is. Get her out of the party. It's Ereshkigal time, baby. So, like, yeah, Ereshkigal came out, like, she came out with that buff swinging, so yeah, if you've been using Ereshkigal on JP after that buff, you know that she's definitely deserving now of being an S tier servant. Now, the Valkyries, they're just really unfortunate. Like, I don't think they're necessarily bad, but they're definitely living in Parvati's shadow, because instead of getting the quick buff and the NP gain buff, they got the quick buff and the NP damage buff. They got one hit of evasion as their like survivability, a little bit of damage cut. I mean, they get a little bit of NP and star refund for 3 turns, but it's like, do you really need the star refund? You're a quick servant. Like, that's good on an art servant or a buster servant, but that's like giving Jack a skill that drops stars immediately. You're like, it's just, you should be doing that already with your AoE quick NP. A little odd, you know what I'm saying? And then, like, it's nice that their NP has built-in Pierce Evasion. Like, that's cool, that's nice, but they're really gonna need, like, a buff. And I think they fit in this B tier where it's like, they're not bad. You can use them to loop and everything, but you're only using them if you don't have Parvati, by the way, because now Parvati out-damages them, which is crazy. Well, Parvati out-damages them as the NPs get higher. I believe, like, NP1 to NP1, the Valkyries out-damage Parvati, but then as Parvati and them start scaling, Parvati's damage scaling is higher, so she ends up out-damaging them. I think it's... Dude, I think it's actually so bad. We looked at this on stream, but I believe it's NP2 Parvati out damages NP5 Valkyries, right? Like, I think it's actually just that bad because of, like, how good Parvati's damage scaling is. So you're definitely using Parvati over the Valkyries any day of the week, and just give them, like, an NP gain buff or, like, just an immediate battery, and it'll help them out a lot. Like, because people want to use them for farming, so help them out with that. Ibaraki Lancer, I kind of see her again. It's just, like, a very solid, you know, B tier Lancer you could bring. She has a very solid charisma that gives, you know, herself the NP damage buff. She has the Oni charisma with the added buff of giving herself some NP gain. She has like a debuff cleanse, some decent star weight. NP pierces defense and drops 30 to 50 stars, which is an effect that I really like. I like it when Buster or Art Servants drop stars for them to play around with so they can become like a really good crit servant. But, you know, I think, again, like a lot of these other servants, just give her maybe one more buff and she'll be looking pretty right now. Like, I think she just needs like one more thing. I would say that, like, out of the three of them, I probably have the most fun using Ibaraki Lancer out of these three, so that's pretty good for her, I guess, but she does need probably, like, I don't know, like a little bit of extra survivability or just one more thing to help her just be like an insane damage DPS servant. Oh boy, Qin Liangyu, oh my goodness, like, I don't even know where to put this servant, because she's not bad. Like, she's a servant that, okay, so she's a servant that if you guys don't remember who this is, I know a lot of people forget she even exists. She's a servant that's based around doing face card damage, and she has a lot of things to help her out with that, right? Like, she has a unique 2x guts, she has a 20% battery, and then her NP gives her the buff that she lowers the enemy's defense when she attacks, and she removes their debuffs when attacking. So, like, she just does the big boy damage once you get the NP, because she also gets, like, an attack buff, a crit buff. She just kind of starts popping off, but it's kind of like a worse version of what Super Orion is, ironically enough. Like, it's like they made Qin Liangyu over here, and then they were like, okay, so we have a solid basis for a servant that does insane face card damage, and then they just took it to the next level with Super Orion. So, like, I'm gonna put her in B tier, because I actually don't think she's that bad. She's definitely fun to use, like, she's really fun to take out for a spin, and kind of just start smacking people with face cards, but she definitely needs some help. I mean, I think the fact that half of the FGO fan base forgets that this servant even exists is pretty telling that they need to do something to help her out a little bit. But, I mean, it's also like, unless you're Super Orion, people are just going to use, like, actual normal DPS servants anyway. Like, you have to give people a reason to use a servant that's based around their face cards. Like, you got to give them a good reason, and there's just not a good reason to use Qin Liangyu unless you're just a huge fan of cute Chinese girls, bro. Like, I mean, that's just how it is. Then we have Bradamante. Bradamante, I mean, is kind of just like a 5-star version of the Valkyries. Like, I mean, I think she just needs like an NP gain buff, and she's going to be really good. Like, that's kind of all she needs. Like, I don't know how this is like so hard for DW to realize that, like, that's what's making Parvati over here super insane. The fact that she's got like a decent quick buff built in with NP gain, like, that makes her really good, with like the refunding ability on her NP as like a nice bonus on top. But Bradamante, you look at her and you look at her on paper and she looks really good. Like, the 30% arts and quick buff for 3 turns, the guts, the targetable 20% battery, the NP buffs its own damage when you fire it, has a decent stun chance if you want to bring her to challenge quest. But you notice, like, the quick buff isn't big enough to, like, buff her NP gain rate, and she has no NP gain skill of her own to speak of, and she doesn't have a thick enough battery to make up for the fact that she's not going to be looping a lot of her NP back. So she just ends up being like a very average cute servant to have in your box. Like, let's be honest, if you summon for Bradamante or you go for her, it's because she's cute, right? Like, you're not going for her because she's super good in any way. So she's basically just a 5-star version of the Valkyries. That's what I'm going to say about that. Then we have Pingu on the other hand. Pingu over here, we got I'm going to put Pingu and Bingu next to each other. So Pingu over here, premium arts looping lancer, right? Like, I think whenever we all looked at Pingu for the first time and we saw that her first skill is a 5-turn 20% arts buff that's on a 4-turn cooldown, meaning that you can loop this skill, no Tamamo needed, already super insane, right? Then she can, like, suck up her allies' NP gauge, and it's 30% per ally, so she can get 60% NP back. Means that she could just loop her NP, like, she just doesn't care, right? Like, even if you're, like, you fall short, or it's a weird node or something, like, you're like, oh, it's a 3-2-3 node? Well, doesn't matter. Even if I missed out on a little bit, I'll just suck up the NP from my other allies, because keep in mind, you're probably doing arch chains, because, you know, you're probably like, oh, I'm just going to click the blue buttons to make sure that I give my, like, supports, whoever's there, just extra NP for why not, but it actually helps Lancer out here, right? Because then she's sucking up that NP, right? So, like, you can keep doing arch chains with, like, your double Castoria and your Melt over here, and normally it really doesn't matter because you're not going to use, like, your Castoria's NPs, but you can actually use that as an extra resource for Melt. It's actually really good. And then she has a fat 50% attack buff. Her NP removes enemy dodge, pierces defense. And then as an art servant, again, like I was talking about for, what is her name? Ibaraki over here. She actually drops 20 to 40 stars on her NP. And I really like that for art servants because they don't have a very good way to gen stars for themselves. You know, art servants have a natural star gen value of 0. And so when they have the ability to just drop a bucket of stars for them to play around with, it just makes him super good, all right? Like, it just makes him very, very solid. So she loops very well, has big attack buff, and can actually be kind of like a crit servant if she wants to be, if you want to use her in that way. Then we have Caenis. Caenis is one that I'm a little divided on right now. I don't know if I, like, want to put her in A tier or high A, or S tier or high A. Sorry, boys. You know, your boy kind of losing it right now. But I think I'm going to put her in high A tier next to Lancer Artoria, because that's kind of how I see her. I just kind of see her as a more modern, updated version of Lancer Artoria. Instead of, like, having the Dookie Charisma, she's got the good 2-turn monstrous strength buff that's giving her a 40% attack buff for 2 turns. She's increasing her own attack when she attacks, and she actually lowers the enemy's attack when she attacks. So she's becoming tanky, and she's hitting harder as she starts doing more damage. They gave her a 20% battery that definitely helps her out a lot. And they also gave her star refund, where she's getting 15 stars every turn for 3 turns. This actually really helped Caenis' consistency out a lot, because now she kind of gets a little bit of extra stars to play around with to make sure she's actually doing decent crit damage, because that's kind of a main component in going for her NP, as her NP gives her a 50% crit buff for 3 turns. So this kind of helps her be a better crit servant, because it helps her get to her NP faster with the battery, and then it also ensures that she actually has extra stars floating around that she can play around with to do some big crits. So very, very high tier, A tier servant, right? I'm going to put her there because I kind of see her as, like, what Lancer Artoria probably could be if they buffed her a little bit. But, you know, and I know I was saying that, like, maybe if they buffed her, she could be S tier, but, like, the more I look at, like, some of these servants up here, I'm like, do I think she's quite as good as some of these people? Not sure, right? I'll let you guys in the comments down below debate that from what we talked about. But, bro, Romulus, like, don't play with me, all right? Don't play with me, okay? First and foremost, he's got the Ishtar Charisma. And if you don't know what the Ishtar Charisma is, it's where you buff the entire party's attack and then you give them crit damage. But instead of just give them, you know, poo-poo stinky 20% crit damage, he gives all the Romans a 50% crit buff. Now, you might be saying, what if I'm not using Romans? Like, what if I want to use Romulus, Parvati, and Ereshkigal? Last time I checked, Ereshkigal's not a Roman. Well, Romulus says everybody's a Roman, and when you fire his NP, not only does he do big boy damage for everybody that has, like, the Roman trait, and by the way, Romulus smacks multiple instances of the Roman trait on the enemy party, but he turns your entire party into Romans as well. Then he says, you guys are all Romans, enjoy the fat crit buffs, and just go start smacking everybody in the face. He's also, you know, pretty good with survivability and consistency with his 2 hits of invincibility and his 30% battery. Like, the boy Romulus is just kind of a Giga Chad. Like, he kind of lives up to his reputation. And yeah, even after like about a year now since he's come out, he still definitely holds up. He's also very good in the meme comps of like Romulus, Boudica, and Siegfried. And if you go fight a dragon, you can actually start hitting like millions of damage outside of events, no CEs needed. Like, he allows pretty disgusting team comp. So yeah, Romulus definitely going in S tier. Vritra, on the other hand, I'm a little disappointed in Vritra. I actually often forget that I have her on the JP version of the game. She definitely is good enough to get the job done, but not much better than that, if that makes sense. Like, she can do the looping, she can do harder content, but it's right at the level of like acceptable, right? Where I think she's doing a decent job. But there are some times that I'm like 3% NP off from being able to finish a loop, and I'm like, Vritra, really, girl? Like, you're gonna let me down here, man? Like, come on, bro, you can't be doing this. I think one of the issues is that her third skill gives her NP every single turn, and that's supposed to help her be very consistent in her looping, but it also has a one-time NP damage buff that you want to save for the last node. So it puts you in a really bad position of, do I save this for the last node where I know I'm going to need that little bit of extra NP damage to clear the last node, or do I start it now to ensure that I have my NP every single node? So it puts you in like really annoying situations like that. Also, just like some other odd things, that she has like an anti-divine buff, but it's only 30%, and usually at the bare minimum, those like anti-whatever niche buffs are at least 50%, if not way higher. But like, they give her a 30% anti-divine buff. It's super, super weird. They give her like a really solid 3-turn arts buff where it's like 30% arts for 3 turns. And then they also give her arts card star weight, but that also only lasts for like 1 turn. So like, Vitra's just a very, very odd servant. Then even if you look at her NP, right? She seals all enemy skills, which is good. And then she reduces all enemies' arts resistance as well, but that doesn't proc first. So she's just an odd servant. Like, I think she's good, but I think she has a lot of flaws in the good stuff that she has. Like, I think she's a very mishmash, wonky character, again, that just hits the line of acceptable A-tier servant. Like, she is good, but I don't think she's much better than that. Dude, Melusine? Bro, this is like one of the biggest dubs in ZTL history, bro. Melusine came out and people were like, I don't know if Melusine's gonna be broken, bro. How do we know if Melusine's gonna be broken? Bro, this servant Melusine, this girl over here, just took everything we knew about FGO and just threw it in the dumpster, because she was like, bro, what if I'm an insane, and I'm talking insane, single target arts servant that, by the way, every time she fires her NP, she gives herself an NP gain buff. So like, every time she fires her NP, it gets easier and easier to loop her NP. Like, you can basically just keep smacking them with the NP until they're dead, because she'll just keep stacking that arts NP gain buff until the enemy is no longer existent. Like, she'll just keep eviscerating them, and she'll be doing a lot of damage as well, because keep in mind, she's got like a 40% attack buff right on top of all of that. She's doing big boy damage, you know, and smacking them around. But then if you're like, okay, I'm kind of bored of smacking one person with my NP, I need this girl to be a buster farmer. Well, if you started off in her second ascension, you can actually click the third skill and get a 100% battery, and then you turn her into a buster looping servant that just does big boy damage, right? And she trades that NP gain buff on her NP that she no longer needs for a buster buff to make sure that she does, you know, more big boy damage, and she also gains Pierce Invincibility on the buster NP. So like, Melusine is just always really good, like no matter the situation. Do you need to just annihilate somebody into the ground with a billion arts NPs? She's got it. Do you need to just destroy the entire enemy party with a big boy dragon that just obliterates everything? She's got you covered on that front too. Like, Melusine is really nuts. Like, Melusine is very, 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 very good. Like, she's one of those servants that'd be like, hey, NA players, get your binoculars out, look over a few years in the future, and make sure you target this servant. This servant is insanely good. Then finally we have Percival. Percival, I think, is I think he's a little bit better than Vritra, right? I think he's kind of got like that part secured. But if we were like to like kind of rank all these three, I think that's kind of how like the arts looping ones would go. I think Percival's pretty solid, but I don't think he quite hits the heights of Meltryllis over here because he's got the 3-turn 30% arts buff, gives the entire party 3 turns of NP damage, has a 20% battery. He has the Garrett skill where he can taunt, and then he can just massively gas up his NP for every hit he takes while he's being taunted. He has a targetable invincibility, which also is pretty nice. And then his NP not only buffs his NP damage even more, but it has a pretty nice gimmick to where like it heals the weakest servant in the party. So he does have some utility there. Like he kind of helps keep other people alive, and it's just a generic, very good arts looping Lancer. Right? Like he's just very good on that front. I mean, not doing anything super insane, just very generic, but that's very good. Like if you're a generic servant, you're probably going to be doing pretty good as long as you have decent buffs. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I will link the tier list in the comments down below if you want to make your own tier list. But with that being said, your boy's throat is absolutely killing him right now. So I'm going to go just rest for a fat minute. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.